I've been talking all week. We've been talking all week about the 42 negative confessions or the principles of Ma'at. And I know a lot of people will rather us say the principles of Ma'at as opposed to the negative confessions, and I understand why. Sometimes we have to get the information out there in ways people can know what we're talking about and understanding it. But we've been talking all week about the principles of Ma'at and what that might mean and how we might start to study some of the things that our ancestors in ancient times talked about that help them work through important things in life, coping mechanisms. How do you really think about how you live your life? And even if you had to, as in the principles of Ma'at, display their idea that after a person died, after the deceased died, that they went to a hall of judgment. And as they were walking through their hall of judgment, they had to make certain proclamations about how they lived their life, how they were free from sin when they were in the world, how they lived their life according to certain principles. And if their words were not true, they would obviously be devoured and their heart would not weigh against balance out against a feather on the scales, and they would be devoured by a beast, if so to speak. They would not be able to go into everlasting life and into peace. The idea that there is a certain set of principles or a certain way that you can live your life that would allow you to, in the afterlife, enjoy peace and tranquility is amazing. And to think about the 42 things, if you will, the things that they identified as being some of the most important things a person should identify with, even after life, to show that they lived a good life, it's kind of significant. And that's why we're looking at these principles to see how can we apply them today, what can we learn, what can we get out of them today. And the one I'm focusing on today is the one of, I've not made anyone to feel fear. And when you think about that, the whole idea of fear and what that means, and I'll go back to like the negative confessions. And for those of you who asked like, where I've gotten this from or where you can find a copy, one of the documents is the Papyrus of Ani, which talks about the book of going forth by day, or commonly called the Book of the Dead. The Papyrus of Ani, the Papyrus of Nebsini will have a collection of the negative confessions, the principles of Ma'at in it, in one of the chapters. And so when we talk about that, one of the ones I'm talking about right here in number 21, it talks about, I've not struck fear into any man. I've not struck fear into them. And when you think about it, and this is from the Theban or the Waset version of this book of Coming Forth by Day. When you think about the idea of I have not struck fear into any man, why would the ancients select that as an important thing to be able to talk about and say after you've died? Like, why would that be an important thing? So let's talk about it. Let's explore that a little bit. When you think of it, when I think of fear, I think about fear in its negative sense. Always you can take words, and sometimes words may not completely encapsulate the whole idea of what an essence is. So you have to really use your judgment and not just the words itself, because some people will say, oh, well, you need fear for strength, or you need fear in certain situations. Of course you do. But when you're talking about it in this context, we're thinking about fear from the standpoint of intimidation. Think about fear and intimidation and those people who use intimidation not for a good reason, not for protecting their family or for standing up for their country or something like that. People who use fear and intimidation maybe in the classroom or in their own home. There are people who parent like that or who tend to act like that to try to bring fear and doubt and instability and intimidation to other people, and that's how they get their power. And imagine one of the Kemetan pharaohs, one of the kings, one of the leaders, and the people who would have their information written down on the walls and in books in their tombs would say, I have not struck fear into any man. I've not made anyone to feel fear. And imagine that, and think about that you don't want to have that type of intimidation and destroying of another person's divinity. Because when you think about fear, you're thinking about doubt. You're trying to raise doubt into someone's mind. You're trying to make them scared of something that may not even happen, make them more afraid to stand up than and to something that might be bullying them versus being able to kind of have kowtowing inside of themselves. You want to make that person be afraid of standing up for you, afraid of standing up for what's right, to have doubt in their mind. And a lot of people, unfortunately, use fear and intimidation with children. I mean, and I think about the Bible, and I think about when Jesus said, to suffer the little children, because this is what the kingdom of heaven is made of, or such as the kingdom of heaven. When people in particular use fear and bullying and intimidation with children, that's a special kind of evil, in my opinion, especially for someone who might be abusive to children. And you can be abusive in any type of way. You can be abusive physically, you can be abusive verbally, you can be abusive mentally to people, and you can probably even be abusive spiritually to people. And people who are abusive and bullies, whether they're in a school setting or in a home setting, tend to use fear to intimidate those people. And that, even according to a Kemetic way of looking at religion and spirituality and spiritual development, that's one of the main things you should not do with your life, is to cause someone to have fear and doubt within themselves, especially when it's not called for. It's not appropriate. And that's what abusers do. That's what bullies do. That's what bad people do. And sometimes they themselves can't fight somebody who would be equally matched to them, so they choose to put fear and intimidation into somebody else's heart. And you can easily see it when you think about a playground or a bully on a playground doing that. But then also that translates to adults. That translates to adults trying to do that to other people. And that's not something we should accept in our lives and in our homes and our families. And it's not something you should do. Because when I think about fear, I think it not only applies to putting fear into other people in a negative type of way, in an intimidation type of way, to other people, I think it also applies to yourself. Think about what fear is. And for me, when I think about fear, I think about doubt. You know, for you to be afraid of something where you should not be afraid, for you to be afraid, you have to think about something. Now, I'm not talking about fear that's the beginning of wisdom, or fear that's smart for you. Because, you know, if you're sitting somewhere and you're on a nature hike and you see a bear, well, you might feel fear, and you probably should. You should feel fear. You should have your whole fight or flight part take over and be able to do what you have to do to keep yourself alive. So you might be in a situation where you see a wild animal and you know what? That animal's faster and stronger. Maybe you should feel fear. Or maybe you're in a situation where you're in some place dangerous and you should feel fear. So fear can have an important part, but I'm not talking about that fear. I'm talking about the kind of fear that paralyzes you, that causes you to have doubt. And usually that fear comes about by what you're thinking about. Now, if you're sitting there and you see a wild bear coming at you, well, you should be thinking about that bear, and your body should be responding in a way that's fear. But if you're sitting and you're thinking about maybe your relationship with God, or maybe how you're doing in school, or maybe something that's happening at home, or maybe it's a business that you're looking to go into, whatever that might be. And a lot of times, sometimes when we have our purpose in life, when we have a situation where we know there's more that we can do with our lives. And a lot of people talk about purpose, and we talk about purpose-driven lives. And you know inside yourself there's something that God would have you to do, something God would have you do for somebody, something God would have you do to help somebody. And even though you have that feeling, you may let fear sit in. You may start to think about, and ideate on, well, what if I go help that person, or I do something and it could be a bad thing, or what if this happens? And you allow doubt and mistrust and the thought that you ideate on to stop you from doing something that you know you should do. And so that to me is another type of fear. Not only do you not want to strike fear into somebody else, you don't want to strike it into yourself. You might be in a situation, I've had several situations where I've been in situations, maybe I'm in a city somewhere, or downtown, wherever, and I want to give somebody some money. Maybe it's a person who's asking for money and I want to give them. And you may have that doubt comes to you. Well, is that person going to use the money right? Like, who cares? Let me do my part. That's up to them to do the receiving part. Or what if this is going to be a situation? So you think about it, and maybe it's a situation that's safe, and I've given the person the money, maybe it's $5, $1, whatever, and seeing the person absolutely just break down and thank you. And not even just thank you to me, just thank you to God. And you can tell that individual, that person needed something. So what if I had let the doubt and the $5 I had in my pocket that I was able to give just as I'm walking by, and just to hand it or drop it to the person in a cup or something? What if I'd let that stop? That whatever that person needed, whatever joy, whatever experience that person needed, they would not have had. And I just remember that affected me one time in particular, where I saw a woman who looked like she might have been a grandmother, who was sitting out on an area, who was in an area we wouldn't typically see someone asking for money, but she was there. And all I had in my pocket was $5 or $6 or whatever, $7, $10, whatever it was. And something told me just to give her the whole amount. And as I was walking by, I just, you know what, forget the fear, forget the doubt, right? Who knows what just give it. And I just gave it, and I just kept walking, said, thank you, God bless you, just kept walking. And then when I got to the end of the corner, I turned around, this woman was like just looking up with almost tears and just thank you, God, whatever she needed that for. I could tell in my spirit that it was something she really needed. And then I thought to myself, what if I had not given myself the opportunity to give? What if I had not given myself the opportunity to help someone? That helped me just as much as it helped her. And I think about, and maybe even more, I think about the opportunity to have purpose in your life, to have a purpose-driven life. And then therefore fear sometimes will stop you from living out your purpose, stop you from being a blessing, stop you from actually doing the things that you want to do. And one of the main things is about that is your mind, where you start to ideate on and think about things you shouldn't think about. So the idea of ways to overcome fear, one of the ways I think you overcome fear is not to let yourself think about things that may be a bit irrational, not to let yourself just over and over and over again think about the negative. Think about the positive. So what might happen? What will be good for me if I do this? What can happen? I make sure I'm safe. I do whatever I'm going to do. What could happen? What could be a good outcome? What could happen if I tried to start that business, if I wanted to be an entrepreneur? What could happen if I did help that child make it through school, or help someone in my family and they want to get, what could happen? How could I benefit? How could they benefit? How could this benefit the family? What could happen if I helped a homeless person get into a house? Or what could happen if I went back to school myself? Or what could happen if I started reading something that I've always wanted to read, or doing something that I always wanted to do, instead of maybe spending, this time in front of the television or watching sports this weekend or TV or what have you. What if I spent that time doing something that I've always wanted to do and not allow fear to stop me from my purpose? And so there's this wonderful balance that you find where you're not focusing on a negative. If you're doing something that you think might be a risk, make sure there's safety there, right? So we're not going to take the idea and the concept of fighting fear and take away common sense. When you think about a lot of the things that are the negative confessions and the principles of Ma'at, the idea of Tahuti, the deity of wisdom, the representation of wisdom in God's will is always there. And I kind of also look at it like common sense. You don't take away common sense from any of these principles that we're talking about, but you do allow yourself to push yourself on the positive side of it. Push yourself to the positivity of your purpose, and not to allow negative things like fear to hold you back. So I just wanted to say that. God bless you. Please join me the next day when we talk more about principles of Ma'at and how we will not let things hold us back. We'll continue to move forward into the future. Thanks so much for listening. God bless you.